over 200 years, see incredible works from Turner, Kusama, Monet, Turrell, and many more. From one of the UK's most adored cultural institutions, see art in a new light. Light, works from Tate's collection. Now open.
Every time I see that trailer, I'm like, could I do the light voice? Could I run this interview? Like, welcome to ACMI RMIT Game Talks. Don't think it's quite my style though. But yes, welcome to ACMI RMIT Game Talks, presented by RMIT Games and ACMI. I'm Jini Maxwell. I'm a curator at ACMI, and I have the great pleasure of being joined by Alexander Perrin and Joshua Tatangelo, who are 2 Point Interactive and who made Heavenly Bodies. My favourite game of 2021, honestly one of my favourite games of all time, and consequently, because I make the rules around here, a game we now have 2 displays on in our public exhibition. Before we get started talking about kind of your history of working together and the design of the game, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, and to pay my respects to their elders past and present. The First Nations people of this continent were the world's first creative technologists and have been sharing culture and stories through play for tens of thousands of years and continue to do so today. They were also the world's first astronomers, which I mention because today we are looking at a game made here on Kulin country but set in the vast expanse of space. Heavenly Bodies is a game that the more I think about it, the more I understand how it kind of defies genre signifiers. In it, you play either alone, in single player, or cooperatively with another player as a cosmonaut who is given a series of tasks on a spacecraft inspired by spacecraft design sensibilities of the 70s and 80s, both in the US and in the Soviet Union. By following detailed instructions in your operations manual, your cosmonaut negotiates a series of delicate mechanical tasks in zero gravity, from mining minerals from asteroids, to unfurling solar panels on the outside of your shuttle. This month, as I said, we have 2 new displays on the game, which focus on the quality of light in the game, and one focusing on the design of the shuttles themselves. First of all, I would love to know how you 2 feel about seeing your work in a museum context.
Bizarre. Mind-blowing to have it like behind real glass. It's like it's very, very special.
I think the glass element really kind of adds to it. But it's particularly strange, I guess, because we're so close to it and we're still kind of working on it. It's strange stepping like from the computer to the museum and seeing our work again. It's kind of like a bit of a double take, but it's a big kind of life goal for us. This is pretty crazy to have it.
Yeah, like especially within ACMI, which is like, I think personally for both of us, has like some real, we have like a long relationship with ACMI, coming here since kids. So to like be on, to see games as kids, in ACMI and being able to play them and then like being on the other side of that, it's magical.
Yeah. I was saying earlier that it really kind of shocked me how detailed your journals and process work kind of were. When I visited your studio, I was expecting more kind of like bits and bobs, like armfuls of scrap paper, which is sort of what my process looks like, but yours is incredibly precise and iterative, so it lends itself very well to display.
Yeah, I guess you did give us a heads up on visiting as well, so we had a chance to tidy it. But it's just kind of part of the process of how we work, really, that kind of iteration of sort of getting all our ideas out, working through them, and then kind of taking the bits that work and assembling that into what you see in the game. Yeah.
I think these slides might be slightly out of order, because while I do want to go back to this historical stuff, I thought we might play a clip of the game itself first. Here. Can I play from here, or should you? That works. So as you can kind of see from this clip, the game combines incredibly fine motor control over the cosmonaut or astronaut themselves with the totally unbound space of zero gravity, which is kind of what I find so, I suppose, odd about it. It's a puzzle game which gives you all of the solutions to every puzzle, and it's a physics game set in zero gravity, where the rules don't entirely apply, which is a fascinating and confounding set of design decisions to have made that I think only makes sense if you kind of go back through some of the old work that you made as students, because you've been working together for some time. I thought, Josh, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah.
With this game I found by trawling through the archives.
Yeah.
A student project called Matter,
Yeah.
where you play as a scientist who's ripped a hole in time and space, and you're desperately trying to remember what happened as I speak, aren't you?
It's a good refresher, yeah. Yeah.
And it combines kind of, I suppose, a fictional approach to quantum physics with physics platforming mechanics. And I wondered if you, I just found this fascinating partly because you can't really see it from here, but the colour scheme immediately struck me as familiar. It has that like warmth and that softness and that analogue quality, which you definitely see later in Heavenly Bodies, but also that sort of fictionalised approach to science. I wondered if that's always been an interest of yours.
Yes, it has, yeah. I think, I mean, for the both of us, we're quite technical and into those kind of, like, the reality of science, I guess, how things actually are. But I think it's kind of, like, equally as fascinating getting into kind of, like, faux science and creating things that are kind of, like, you know, referential or inspired by real things, but kind of just extrapolating them in a way where it makes them fall into this realm of like, well, it could be plausible, it could be something that exists, but it's not. We've just completely made it up. And I think it's just fun to work within those kinds of constraints as well, and not always just kind of recreate things as they are, to just sort of skew it in a way where it can have its own little narrative, I suppose. Yeah.
Heavenly Bodies was pretty heavily influenced, full of slip-ups today, pretty heavily influenced by a kind of historical period and by factual material. But I want to know what the biggest science lie in Heavenly Bodies is. Are there any good ones in there?
Whoa. I reckon the amount of iterations we did on the what is the level 6 energy. Like that like vibrating machine that you encounter and have to like assemble bit by bit and get operational. Like absolutely just made that up out of thin air. And was like what like why would there be like a giant kind of like washing machine like power generator on a space station inside like a giant tube of maze of like air ducts essentially. It was bogus. Didn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. Even in our file names and kind of like design docs, it's changed names like 5 times. Like from the drawing to the handbook to the mesh. Like I still don't think we even call it the same thing when we talk about it.
No, it's been a communication nightmare.
Can I know some of the names for your Wonder Machine?
At one point it was a thruster.
Yeah.
Currently, it's an oxygen generator. At one point, it was a turbine.
Yeah, and it was almost like a cold fusion reactor at one stage.
Sounds like science to me.
Yeah,
It really sounds like some science.
The words are all in there, but it's just it's not actually doing anything.
What kind of drew you? I suppose this is a question for both of you. Maybe while we look at another early project, which is quite adorably called Noir Mittens, also demonstrates an early interest in extremely delicate machines and helping them maneuver around space by Alex. What drew you to game design kind of as a discipline? Can we play that one, please?
It's very funny seeing this like up on this very screen. I actually presented this game for the first time in this very room like however many years ago. It must have been 4 or 5 years at the first Parallels. But I think for me like I always had like growing up and for many years just loved illustration, loved kind of capturing or trying to illustrate sort of intricate, detailed systems, whether they involve like life or machines, or just kind of maybe a streetscape or I don't know, like a Rube Goldberg machine or something like that. It was like trying to like detail motion and systems within a static way, which is with graphite illustration. Then coming to uni, I think it was in Jen Lade's class, who's with us today. Managed to get this prototype for a little like a hot air balloon. I was learning a little bit of programming at the time. Picked up a game engine, and I was suddenly able to like create this very like simple physical behavior using basic physics and basic scripting, which emulated a real world physical behavior, but in a playful way. And I was like, this is the bomb. This is so cool. This is what I've been wanting to do. I can actually bring to life all these kind of like systems I haven't had in my head, which were all just on paper. So yeah, for something like bizarrely named Noir Mittens and all the other various games I've created, like cats on pogo sticks and fighting umbrellas and various things like that they've always all been kind of created with the intention or with the goal of sort of simulating a really playful physical system, which you're probably not going to get actually in reality, but are based off like physically, roughly physically accurate kind of laws, I suppose, or rules. So yeah.
You told me once that you don't like drawing people, that you like drawing machines and you like drawing windmills, or at least you went through a phase, but
Absolutely.
not such a fan.
Big windmill phase, yeah.
And fair enough too. Until you found out that they all light on fire?
Yeah, it's terrifying. Yeah. If the wooden Dutch windmills, if they're caught in a storm and they're not tethered down, then they spin so fast that the gears inside ignite and cause this like spinning like fan of fire and doom, and it's just not serene at all. Yeah,
wild.
terrible.
And looking at your early work like this, and A Short Trip, which is in a similar style, there are figures in it, but there's certainly, I would not describe them as a feature of the work. How did your workflow change when you put a person in the middle of it? Did it change?
Like with Heavenly Bodies. Thankfully, we have a very good artist who can take that on. Well, I suppose that was a even just keeping the helmet on that character was a consideration from day one. It was
it was never going to come off. Yeah.
Yes, it's the same reason Mario has a hat, right? Because they couldn't do hair. Like, it's quite true apparently. But yeah, same. We had a helmet on because it's too many implications. So they need to take the helmet off, and like, who is that character under there? What does that say? It's complex.
I have to say, I remember the first time I played, I lost my little cosmonaut into the vast expanse of space. I think it was data, where you have to kind of assemble this data tower, leave the spacecraft to do so. And they just blipped back in, into the middle of the shuttle, and I was like, do I have feelings about this? I'm not going to engage with them. I'm just going to keep playing. So I'm also grateful that...
You're always safe and sound in reality.
Exactly.
In the reality of the game.
Yeah.
You mentioned Jen Lade earlier, who is our celebrity guest. She played a critical role in Heavenly Bodies, actually, if I'm right.
Yeah.
She introduced the two of you as your university lecturer?
Yeah. So we both studied the same course at RMIT, but we were a year apart, 2 years apart. So So we never actually really crossed paths as students, but we were both being taught by Jen, and I think she kind of saw that we had similar sensibilities, or that we'd get along. And I think we were set up on some kind of play date, but it was actually to make a piece of music for somebody. So I think one of Jen's colleagues or friends was making a video piece, and Alex at the time, I don't know if you still do, but you were playing violin. And I make like electronic music, so we kind of got together and we made this soundtrack for a short film. Well, yeah.
Yeah, it was like a generative art piece or something, wasn't it? Yeah.
How quickly did that translate, or I guess develop, into a game-making partnership?
Pretty quickly.
Yeah, it was like day one. It was like, we're going to get along.
I was like, once we're done with this music, let's go. We're going to make some games, kind of.
What was it that you kind of, I guess, recognized in each other? Like, what was that compatibility creatively?
I don't know. A lot.
Yeah, like it came down to like, I think like a style in even what we were making was, there are, things you could compare, but would say like quite different. But I think even just down to like liking each other as people, and like kind of, we could both see that. We had a certain kind of like a work ethic, not in like you're going to be like a valuable worker, but like just that like if we wanted to like make things together, we would just click. We'd be able to just like communicate really well and just understand and just kind of like work really harmoniously, and also just have like similar values at the time for kind of like what games could be, and back however many years ago that was, like to have indie games were still in its quite juvenile, like a juvenile sort of period, So to make, you know, I think we're both like making games about, you know, kind of like the nebulous term, sort of like experiences, and you know, like what does something feel like, and what, you know, trying to create like a feeling inside the player instead of just entertainment. I think we were both kind of like really exploring that concept at the time, and we could both see that in each other's work. At least this is how I certainly feel.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I think like it was probably during, you know, cat and windmill phase. But I do remember just thinking, like, seeing Alex's work and how he did it. I was just like the conviction of like, no, cats and windmills, and they're gonna be perfect. It's gonna feel nice to play. Like everything was just so considered and like coming. I saw it as like always coming from the right place. It was never, because I mean, back then it was easy for people to kind of like be quite openly derivative of like, oh, I want to make a big shooter, or I want to make a whatever. And then like opposite end of the spectrum, I saw, you know, someone like Alex making stuff where it was just like, it just had so much like, so much to say and so much heart, and it was really just, yeah, it's like just good stuff. You know, like when you see good stuff, you just know it. It's kind of hard to articulate it, but it was a bit like that. Yeah.
The first project you worked on together, I believe, was Rope Jacks.
Yeah.
Which was also a co-op weird physicsy game. Could you tell me a little bit about what that game is and how you started making it?
Yeah, so we did that at a game jam. So when we made that, we were a team of 3. So it was Alex, myself, and Thomas Ingram. And I think it was, I can't remember what game jam it was, but it was like a 48-hour kind of thing.
Back when game jams were like so cool.
Yeah. And there was a theme.
It's a lot of fun.
I don't remember what the theme was. Like, I can't remember how we quite got to this as a mechanic.
Oh, I cannot remember at all.
Yeah.
Either. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you got more to trying to.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it was really just, I think the first time that we'd sort of just been able to be in a room together, and just have free license to kind of make the game, you know, like we're both working. I think I was doing heaps of contract work, and Josh was working full time at another studio. So like we didn't have many hours in the day really, to just make a thing. So it was like, oh, let's go do it. Let's like give it a shot. And yeah, I think it was the first time that we sort of like divvied up, you know, our kind of like natural roles at the time. You know, I was, you know, interested in sort of physics and programming, and Josh was, you know, just like doing just beautiful art. So I was like, all right, let's like carve out our spaces and just like give it a go. And so yeah, I don't know how we sort of, I still don't know how we came up with the idea for this. It's quite remarkable, but
Yeah.
Just like, what if we just put, you know, 2 giant sticky hand lumberjacks between a length of rope and get them to fell trees with their bodies?
Yeah.
I don't know. We had some wacky brains.
Even looking at it again, I think like the 3 of us were drawn to that kind of like, I guess the tactility of it, like the fact that you need to work together to swing and get that kind of momentum. It was all down to like the feel of it again. I'd say that was kind of what, like if we're trying to draw a link, I guess, between early work and now, I think that's kind of the thread, just this trying to capture this tactility and like second to second movement that feels good before you've even been told to do anything yet. I think we're always kind of...
The core movement was just gripping and funny and just silly. It was another of those like, local co-op games which would, you know, then bring around to events, and people just, you know, kids were like cackling at it. Just this, I don't know, it's something I think we found in all our games, just that like having a like a physically based kind of you know, a system of motion combined with some sort of kind of like intuitive manipulation of that motion, and like something that's really direct and kind of, you know, very tactile is like just immediately entertaining for people who pick it up. There's like people just get it. Even if they're not good at it, they're kind of like they you know, all that they need to understand is this kind of one motion, and so it's like it's a very direct form of entertainment. It seems.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just saw an example of that. We just did a tour through the gallery looking at these like freshly instituted displays, and when we saw the playable demo for Heavenly Bodies, there was 2 people playing it co-op, just cracking up with laughter. We couldn't get anywhere near it because, yeah, it's been like one of the most popular playable displays. But I'm interested, you know, there's a tendency, it's something I've been guilty of too, is talking about Heavenly Bodies primarily in terms of its visual influences. But looking back through your previous work, both together and separately, that interest in like movement and the body and the world is so apparent and is done so satisfyingly in Heavenly Bodies. I am really interested in your decision to move a physics game into a zero gravity environment and where that came from, the constraints and opportunities that provided.
Totally. We can start with kind of how you like originated the.
Yeah. So I think we, like the very inception of the game was purely from mechanical focus. It was about trying to sort of boil down the controls of a human body, like with its gangly limbs, the awkwardness and everything about it, into a zero gravity environment. I think space was just always there. I think that's kind of how we came to that, because there was also an element of just sort of like wondering why it hadn't been done. I think once we started controlling the body and seeing how you can kind of grip onto things and swing around and shift your momentum and just how like granular and animated you could be, then thinking about other games set in like microgravity or zero gravity, we were kind of like, why is the player always so mobile and powerful? It's like you've got this really interesting context, but you're given these things like whether it's a jetpack or you'll be in environments where gravity's taken away so you can walk around a spaceship. And I think that made us just kind of knuckle down on it even more and just really try to nail that granular movement of the hands and the body.
Yeah. I think that the like we had this sort of like super early prototype where you sort of had this kind of humanoid like form, and we designed these kind of articulated arm systems which kind of allowed you to almost experience almost like like a muscular like force where you push in one direction with one stick, and it's like it's gesturing your hand outwards, and it's actually using physical forces to move both your shoulder and then move your forearm and then move your wrist in this computed direction to reach in a certain direction, and like I think in the context in an environment, in a physical environment with gravity, it's going to look wonky. It's going to be quap. It's going to be wacky, and it's going to be just like there's too many factors at play in a world with gravity to sort of like isolate that movement in a meaningful way. But you're like stripping gravity away, suddenly it's like you can feel the mass of everything. You can feel inertia. You can feel velocity. You can like I think the first test we had where this very complex like muscular system for this arm actually allowed you to grab onto a wall and like push your body away from it and have that like surface perform that classical like every action has an equal and opposite reaction kind of behavior to it. It was like really really incredible. But never seen it before. Like you just don't really get it. Like if we had gravity, like if we had gravity, like gravity is such a like domineering force in our like environment, and so like trying to move tables and trying to push things around, it's all like now it's too hard because of gravity. But zero gravity context, it's all about all those forces are so meaningful, and every single force has a real real implications, right? A real consequence. You apply a force in a particularly wrong way, everything's going to go haywire, because there's no gravity to keep things grounded and safe and boring.
Something I think is like really amazing about the experience of the game is like falling in and out of like alignment with yourself. Like I would get into these flow states doing like one incredibly specific task, and then as soon as it was done, I was just some guy like flopping around, like no idea what I was doing again. But you have a quote. I'm going to quote you back to yourself. I hope that's okay.
That's okay.
But in an interview with Nick Kennedy for Games Hub, you kind of compared Heavenly Bodies to like a car racing game, which I think is really interesting because I had also heard the like it's co-op in space comparison, and it had never landed to me. But this quote I think really like distilled what's going on in Heavenly Bodies. Yeah, you compared it to a car racing game where you're given this really complex set of controls and complex set of parameters for how you're meant to control a body, which in a racing game is a car, and you've just got to do one thing. But what makes it so satisfying, even after hours of playing, is this elegant beauty that comes from the curves and finding the optimum line. Outside of, I suppose, QWOP and like quote-unquote janky, silly physics games, I wondered if there were other video game experiences that you'd had that kind of helped you fine-tune this experience of the optimum line.
That's really interesting. What comes to mind? Like,
like, is it a Forza or?
Yeah, I mean, so, yeah. There's probably like so many inspirations there, but I don't know what, like, for some reason I've just got Osmos in my head. I've been thinking about it a lot recently, but you're familiar with Osmos. It's like this, like one of the first kind of like iPod Touch games that really blew up, and you're like this little, you would circle essentially. You're kind of like a bacterial blob sort of thing, and you have to shoot tiny pieces of yourself, like essentially get rid of tiny pieces of yourself because you're in zero gravity, and you're essentially like exerting, you're using like a change in mass to like accelerate yourself, and then it's a game about velocity and finding arcs and finding like and you essentially have to absorb all these other little orbs around you to grow bigger and gain enough mass, which you can then use to like push yourself around further. But you have these like, I just remember these beautiful levels it has where you're kind of like revolving around like a sun-like thing, which gives you a little bit of gravity, but it's all about performing like the tiniest little actions, which is getting rid of a tiny little bit of yourself in order to like adjust your trajectory by millimeters, so you're just avoiding one hazardous object and putting yourself on this kind of like harmonious trajectory. That comes to mind.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like I like racing games anyway, but I think what the thing for me is like what you kind of mentioned there about like flow state. I think that's the one kind of ingredient that is what's nice about it. It's the fact that you're kind of at that level where, I don't know whether it happens in Heavenly Bodies, maybe for some people, but you almost need to not be thinking for it to go right. And I think that's what's so kind of hypnotizing about racing games. It's not, whether you like cars or not, it's like once you're out on the track, all you're trying to do is go fast. And it's like from one corner to the next, you're kind of thinking about that flow. And yeah, it happens in our game, I guess. Like once you sort of get a grip on the controls, that's the best place to be, when you're not thinking about which hand is which or which way you were trying to go. When you've finished something, or you realize you're at the end of a level and you forgot how you got there. I think that's kind of like that's the nice feeling.
That's the goal.
That's the goal. Yeah.
It certainly takes a lot of practice to get like that.
Yes, it does.
And I think that, yeah, maybe that was like a really hard thing in like, or like it's probably challenging to like communicate that to other people and get other people to experience that, because this is like a magical experience which we probably only had after, you know, however many dozens, hundreds, eventually thousands of hours of playing this thing. Like you do start to like, you feel like a puppeteer, or like a, you know, cross between like a puppeteer and a gymnast.
Yeah.
Like it's, and you can carry those curves like.
And it still even happens to us. Like it, you know, half the time we're kind of sloppy or whatever, but you know, we'll be playtesting or implementing like a new mechanic, and I'll be watching Alex, or he'll be watching, and there'll be moments where you go, whoa, that was nice. And it's just someone like plugging something in or taking a turn, but there are these little kind of glimpses into it just being kind of elegant, I suppose. Like it goes back to like why we kept chasing the prototype, just like that feeling of watching people on the ISS gracefully like somersaulting and tumbling around. Like that doesn't just happen as soon as you get to space. And I feel like there's a bit of a parallel with our game. You think because it's a game, you'll pick it up and you'll master it, but it really does take a bit of time to shake off that kind of clumsiness.
And an attitude shift as well, I think. The first time I started playing the game, I started on assisted because I assumed I had this concept that I would be bad at it, but it was like probably going to be really hard and I was probably not going to be very good at it. But weirdly, I found the game way more approachable on classic or Newtonian, because it just changed the way I, like, particularly on Newtonian, it's just impossible to think about anything. You just have to be a body. You just have to be a body.
Present.
Like it's all you can do, which is perfect. I'm interested in how you kind of, though I also love assisted mode, particularly getting down from the data tower to that level. I turn it on every time. I'm like, we're not doing this today. But I'm interested in how you kind of fine-tuned those three settings for to kind of facilitate that experience, or to facilitate, I guess, the game for like a wider variety of players. I imagine that was complex process.
Yeah, I mean, you can probably speak to that, what's going on under the hood with the physics.
Yeah, look, it was very, very challenging. And I think, still to this day, there's probably things we'd try to do better. But like it was, I think from the beginning, it's been very, very hard to kind of like identify what people find difficult about the game. Like it's not because it's like, it's not like a get good kind of attitude, but it's more, it seems like some people just, their brains just wire into it straight away and just get it. Like it's almost like this strange like brain plasticity kind of thing. Like it's just like, cannot explain it. Some people just pick it up and are like, yep, let's go, let's do it. And some people don't. So I think like we obviously started with this a system of physics-driven motion in a humanoid form, and tried to get that sort of working as a base, like a base system, like just get it stable, just get the things moving about how they should, and then from there, we sort of like did our best to try and identify what people found the most sort of challenging limitations of having a body in zero gravity.
There's actually a note here in your sketchbook that really made me laugh. That just says, in a production meeting from 2 years ago, moving in a void doesn't feel great.
We probably should have canned the game at that point.
It does not. It's terrible.
How did you approach the pretty fundamental problem of moving in a void not feeling great?
I feel like that specific note that I took was when I think we were prototyping new spaces. And I think we were trying to see what happens when you travel further away from structures. And really quickly we realized that as soon as there isn't something like within a meter or two of reach. Like if you've made a mistake and you're moving in the wrong direction and you're forced to live with that for too long, like there's nothing fun about it. It's just frustrating. So it sort of became a bit of a design constraint, I suppose, that from that point on it was either going to be like give players like plenty of opportunities to grab onto things and have their movement back, or make it really easy to kind of like correct things and have momentum that pushes them back. Because yeah, if you're just stuck in the middle of a room spinning with nothing to grab,
it's a very human. It's claustrophobic, but in like the inverse way.
Yeah.
You know, where you've got this like you even like what worse than nightmare is of being suspended in a space where because void. Of the harsh laws of physics you can't move, you can't go anywhere, you're just stuck.
Yeah, it was like getting akin to having a fear of like being in the ocean or something. You just feel like so stranded and isolated that you just say, I don't want to play anymore like that. You just it's not nice. So
and in the end, the classic mode is pretty forgiving. You can have a little swim.
Yeah.
You can have a little swim in space in classic mode.
Yeah.
Which is a bit more forgiving.
And being able to people really don't. Most people don't seem to comprehend the idea that you can't, again in zero gravity, you can't just sort of rotate your body arbitrarily. You can't just gesture at something and hope to spin to orient in that direction. So indeed, even in classic mode, we've sort of got this. We've got this ability to sort of like point your hand in the direction that you want to go, and your body will sort of like tumble in that direction. Because again, it's another like infuriating and just like I should be able to do this, but it's just makes people very upset, which is reasonable. Yeah, fair.
I imagine there would be a few kind of expectations that you had to break down with this game. For one thing, it's very warm. It's not scary. These are, I would say, like looking at a lot of space games, they're either kooky or scary, and I would not categorize Heavenly Bodies. Probably closer to the kooky end of the spectrum than the scary end, but neither, like absolutely not either. Which I suppose is partly to do with the visual design, visual identity of the game.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could, I know the game began with physics and with movement, but how quickly did you start looking at those like architects and designers of spacecraft in the 70s and 80s as a visual reference?
Yeah, really early on. I think like looking back, I guess like mid 60s and kind of onwards when everything was kind of starting up. I think what kind of compelled us to that sort of era is just this level of like I guess the unknown, as in like everything genuinely was being attempted for the first time, and things were being romanticized, and there was quite a like naive mentality towards this sort of exploration that was going on, and there was just a lot of like things that were actually being done in real life just felt fake, like they were quite fascinating or magical, and we'd often look at references or old space programs and we're just like, they actually did that. Like, it's bizarre. We're doing it as a game, which is one thing, but like humans were actually attempting this in the 60s. So it was just fascinating. And then the visual aesthetic is just something we've always been drawn to, that 60s, 70s. I mean, you can see with our earlier work that more tactile kind of warm use of mediums was just more what we aligned with. And speaking to what you said just before about like the kind of scary sci-fi elements of space, we just never really considered that. We never wanted it to be a cold, hard surfaced kind of like modern space game. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We just wanted to see a game that looked like all the nice kind of illustrations and like artistic interpretations of what it was like to go into space before anybody did it. So we're trying to take those sort of elements of it.
And one of the ways you brought that in was through kind of reference to this Soviet space architect, Galina Balashova, who did these pretty incredible aquarelles for various Soviet spacecraft in the period that are so warm and inviting and colourful.
Yeah.
Must have been kind of a relief being like, oh great, somebody's figured out how to make space look fun.
Remembering that it's humans like going up there and that they need to be comfortable and, you know, things need to look nice as well. Yeah, it's been really interesting just because designing the game, we've always kept kind of a pretty healthy balance, I suppose, between like the influence of the Soviet space program versus something like the work of NASA. It's always been kind of half and half, but it has been interesting looking at kind of like the parallels. The differences between the two. When you look at Galina's work, it's very approachable from the outside. I think you wouldn't really assume it's the work of like a big team of engineers and people building a spacecraft. Like you kind of just want that radio at home. Whereas when you look at stuff that NASA was doing, it's sort of like two extremes. It's either like a really cool but harsh technical illustration that's quite cold and just like, you know, minimal weight, totally efficient. And then at the other end of their work, you've got more like artistic sort of renderings of things to get the public kind of on board with what NASA was doing. There really wasn't much in between except for these outside artists. Whereas with the Soviet space program, Galina's kind of like the champion of it, or like the face of it. Like her work always kind of comes to the top, and it's just hard to ignore like the great work that she was doing. So it was a big influence when we came across her stuff.
Yeah, I think you know, she is an architect, not an engineer, and I think that distinction is so apparent. Again, I have a quote from her from My Life Under the Stars, where she kind of describes her relationship with the engineers being that not just colour selection, though I do want to talk about colour more, but the understanding that a specific interior must be created for a spherical room and features designed in proportion to the shape of the room. It was essential to match these features to the body height of the person, and in my opinion, this constitutes the actual difference to the work of the engineers. For them, the relationship between man and machine was irrelevant, which just seems to synthesize the last 10 years of the stuff you've been making independently and together so perfectly, like this incredibly close understanding of the relationship between the body and the machine. And you can see visually the influence in this screenshot from one of the opening sections of the game and the comms terminal itself. I still can't believe that you naturally work this way. You've made my job so easy that this is just the document you made and worked with. But to get back to Galina, one of the things that she's kind of known for is using colour coding to recreate the kind of illusion of an up and down or direction.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how much she borrowed from that in the game.
Yeah, colour definitely corresponds to systems in our game. So whether something is, for example, like if a cable is running power, it's always orange or red. If it's running data, it'll be blue. All of our sort of like grabbable utilities are usually yellow to hint that they're kind of like non-critical, but you might want to consider using it. And then, yeah, I guess color for orientation as well, just like differentiating between sections of a level, because once you've been doing something and you spun the camera around a few times, it's kind of hard to keep that sense of orientation. So yeah, just using them as big visual cues of like where you were compared to where you are. And also just readability, trying to keep things quite big and bold, because the actions that you're performing are so granular, it's just with your hands. You really need to be able to see at a distance what it is that you're about to use or encounter. And because it is quite tedious even just moving around, we don't want to compound that confusion. So yeah, we bring everything kind of forward with color in that way.
That's something you were speaking to before our interview as well, this idea that you weren't just visually or like aesthetically, you know, inspired by this design sensibility,
Yeah.
but on a functional level, it was kind of an approach that you sort of had to take. You almost a parallel kind of design process.
Yeah, just given the constraints of trying to make a game where you sit down and you can read it, and then it's just about like figuring out how to do it. That's definitely why certain things are just, you know, whether they're bigger than what they would be in real life, or whether they're more gestural, or an interpretation that's like, that technically wouldn't work, but I understand what it's trying to do. A lot of that does kind of align with, yeah, I suppose like the Soviet approach to how they tackled their spacecraft. Like everything was quite readable and logical, and it's just how we had to really go to make things make sense. It's a good approach. If you can read what something does at a distance, if it's communicating like its function, that's always a good start, I think.
Yeah, there's a very harmonious intersection there.
Yeah.
You had a similar story about the belt loops.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, so from developing it and testing it, once we started bringing in tools and other things that you needed to carry, your two hands are your main, you know, vehicle for moving around. So if one hand is holding something, like a spanner, it really only leaves you with one hand. And so we were thinking, like, there's got to be another way to take things with you that don't introduce like a more conventional game inventory or menu or something like that. And then we thought, like, well, it would make sense to just kind of like you'd put it in a pocket, like you'd clip it to your belt. So we had this idea of adding just like hoops or key rings to your spacesuit. And then, yeah, flicking through reference one day, like through museum photos, we found like an old cosmonaut suit. And around the waist, they had like the exact same thing, just carabiners like buckled onto it. And then I was flicking through like a Smithsonian thing of all things they brought back from the Apollo missions. And they just had like this huge like buckle, because I guess they're wearing their gloves, so everything needs to be big and oversized. So they had this huge buckle that you just kind of like hook on. So we took, well, we'd already designed it, I suppose. And then we saw the
same design.
Yeah, then we saw the reference and it's like, okay, we just solved the same problem that they had to solve back in the 70s. Like, it was kind of validating as well.
Yeah, there's this like weird parallel about like us having to create a game which is like readable and sort of like user friendly. That like we're basically creating the same technology that, you know, space scientists did in the 60s, like just through the necessities of what these astronauts are having to use with giant oven mitt gloves.
Yeah.
It's this like similar like scale of interactivity, which seems to be parallel exactly to what we're making. Yeah,
it was a good lesson too, in that like solutions to things really don't need to be that overcooked or designed. Like it was nice to just be like, yeah, just clip it to your pants. Like that's all you need to do, and it'll work.
My final question before we open up for audience questions also kind of relates to parallels. You were talking about the 60s, 70s, 80s being this, particularly 60s and 70s being this period of space optimism, and a period where the idea of space was exciting, but there was also a huge amount of pressure on the idea of space to be exciting. We are in a similar period now, I would say, when there is a lot of media being generated about the idea of space as a kind of commoditized, as like a commodity or a resource. I was particularly thinking about this playing the level Mineral the other day, when your little cosmonaut goes to an asteroid field and starts mining them for ore. I think there's something really, while Heavenly Bodies would broadly be categorized as a non-violent game, and violence in video games is a bit of an overplayed topic, I think there's something to be said about video games and their potential propagandic elements, I suppose. Both, you know, spacecraft are machines with functions, either military machines or, in the case of SpaceX and Blue Origin, kind of capitalist machines. And I'm just interested in how and if you kind of thought about, I suppose, the social ramifications of making space games.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, like I think we definitely did go in, you know, with the same sort of like pure and sort of naive intentions and visions for this, you know, sort of portrayal of space that, you know, the public is, you know, experiencing in the 1960s. But yeah, indeed, like pretty much as we was, you know, starting up this project, like, you know, like SpaceX and all of this is really coming into the forefront of conversation and clearly just becoming like a just a horrible issue. like it's, you know, it's laden with issues about, you know, colonialism and, you know, and not to mention just like, you know, mining and like it's so flawed. And I think like from the very beginning, like, you know, space exploration and research here requires this level of capital, which is, you know, often backed by the military or by mining, like or by, you know, just nasty characters making nasty deals. So it's not a particularly positive space in many ways, and I think certainly with something like minerals, that particular mission, yeah, like in hindsight, probably wasn't a great take. Like, yeah, and like I think we even received a little bit of feedback about, you know, kind of like the planting of the flags on these on the little asteroids, and how, you know, this is like, you know, very sort of colonial act of, you know, chucking like your national flag on unknown soil or whatever was yeah, just not a wonderful kind of not a great image. So we sort of tried our best to sort of like, yeah, like recontextualize what those flags were all about, you know. But even then, probably didn't nail it. And in retrospect, yeah, we probably would have tried to be a little bit more critical. Yeah, how would you think?
Yeah, I think like we definitely will be more conscious of that stuff moving forward. I think we were very kind of just so focused on the mechanics. I mean, in that level specifically was kind of about, you know, extending the reach of where you go in the game and giving people access to this vehicle. And it was like, well, what do you do with it? You explore. What do you find? You don't know. That's why it's exciting. So you grab it and you bring it back. But yeah, reading it from a distance, it can have very different messages. And yeah, we put a flag in there because it was like a waypointing thing. So you could put it down to remember which way you went. But someone looking onwards is like, are you just claiming that rock? And yeah, I think we'd do it differently. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah,
bit of a tunnel vision.
Yeah,
whirlwind development through a weird few years as well. But yeah.
Well, I will say, as beautiful as the game is, it did not encourage me to go to space. I have been a long-time space hater, and I remain that way. And you're working. I lied. I have one more question. You're working on one final update to one. You're working on an update to the game.
Yeah, more content. Yeah.
Currently.
Yes.
Don't quite know when yet it'll be out, but soon enough, hopefully.
That feels very soon after release. How does it feel to retread that territory?
It's difficult. It is tricky, I think. Our main kind of drive has been going back and kind of trying to find the things that we never had room for, that we wish made it into the base game. And that's kind of how we're finding the fun in it again.
That bit is cool.
Yeah.
Like it's nice that we sort of know that anyone who's going to be playing like this additional content has played and most likely enjoyed the first half, so they know how to move their bodies in outer space already.
Yeah.
They can take a little bit of some liberties indulge ourselves a little bit.
Yeah. So that's how we frame it. But yeah, it's been a long time working on this project. So I think we're both pretty keen to get that out and see what's next. Yeah.
Get out of space for a bit.
So sick of space.
Yeah.
If we have just a couple of minutes for audience questions, there's a live mic going around, so people watching the live stream will be able to hear your questions. Anyone?
Hello.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, Alex. Big fan. Thank you very much for that talk. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your process as a team and as collaborators. Like, I know that you sort of loosely fall into these two roles of, like the artist and the engineer or whatever. But there's obviously a lot of other stuff that goes into making a game that isn't just making art or programming. So I'd be curious to know how you, I guess, like negotiate that stuff between you, how you divide that up, and how you work together.
Good question.
Yeah. It's pretty organic, I suppose. Yeah. Do you mean like in relation to the development, or just everything outside of like
workflows or
running? Yeah.
Like how you go about designing a level, and like who does that? Is it a very like, is it just one person's job to do that?
It's a bit of both, but I think I dump ideas a lot more. I think.
Yeah.
I think like the terminal concepts. I think like once we know that we're going to tackle something new, I think we vaguely like, okay, we're making a new level. Here's a bunch of various things that we could do, and it'll usually be way more than what we need. And then it's kind of like a process of both deciding what's interesting. I'll see something you wrote and it'll be like, oh yeah, how about we do that? Or vice versa.
Yeah.
Nothing's really isolated, I think, until it comes time to program or start building assets.
I think, particularly with Heavenly Bodies, I think that's kind of the reason why like our initial kind of playdate meeting was so successful. It was just like we just had this weird sort of hive mind energy. It was just like we just kind of know, like we always just resolve like exactly the same conclusion when it comes to any sort of like design consideration or challenge, or even like references or whatever. Like it's like a lovely kind of like mind reading kind of ability. So when we're like putting together design docs, like we'll be writing the same sentences half the time, but otherwise, it's a we've had to become very good at like using like collaborative software, remote collaborative software, like over COVID. God forbid we mention it, but as you say, just dump it all together and then kind of just sculpt something out of it. Maybe one of us will do a sketch. Or, and
then I think too, like from the process of working on something for so long, it just becomes intuition, really. Like you can just tell straight away, like that's not Heavenly Bodies. Like you can have a million, and we get a lot of suggestions and stuff, that are related to space or to physics games or whatever. But pretty quickly, both of us will just be like, no, that's not what the game's about.
Just ain't cricket.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So it's just intuition, I suppose.
Yeah. It's not a helpful answer.
No.
Sounds nice.
Well, I mean, the downside to that is when it doesn't work, it really doesn't work. Like if one of us comes to a halt or we're stumped, like it's pretty productivity just really like.
Yeah, and the depression sets in.
Yeah. So that's the hard part of it. Yeah.
I think there was one more question up the back.
Hello. Hi.
Hey.
I was just wondering what like the process of like actually controlling and interacting with the game, how that sort of came to be, because as a game it feels very sort of designed for controllers, like first and foremost. So I was just wondering, like, was there a lot of experimentation, or did you know what you wanted to do pretty much immediately with that?
there was quite a lot of I think we sort of I mean, like you had a drawing in your book for what it should look like initially.
Yeah, the initial prototype was kind of like one stick or the mouse would sort of just point your limbs where you wanted them to go. And that worked for a controller or for keyboard, but the downside there is you don't have independent control, and you also couldn't really bend your arms as much when you don't have that. So yeah, for a good year or two, we were just developing for controller.
Yeah.
And then keyboard and mouse became like a really serious consideration where we, considered that they have different needs to play the game, and they're going to need to, potentially rebind controls or just remap it in a way that we haven't thought of
for accessibility purposes.
Yeah.
But I think I think in all of our games that we've made together, I think we always imagine that we're going to be playing them with a controller. It's not. And I think because it all comes back to this kind of desire to create and simulate and then control, fine physical motions, and keyboards are kind of inherent, like they're binary systems where the key is on or off. But analog is by definition it's this analog input where you can apply a very natural dynamic level of force upon your kind of virtual character or avatar or whatever that might be. So yeah, being able to control these arms with the two analog joysticks, it's a very important relationship there. Not to mention the fact that it's this kind of symmetrical input device, which naturally kind of maps to the the symmetry of the human body. So it always made sense, and it's playing with a keyboard real tough. Don't recommend it.
I think it makes a lot of sense that Sony snapped it up for PS5.
Yes,
given that organic analog. Feel.
Funny that, isn't it?
Yeah. All right. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining me, Alex and Josh. That was delightful. Thank you for making such an excellent game.
Thank you for playing and having me.
Yeah.
We have another talk next month. I don't remember who we're interviewing, so I can't spook it. We're going to have to leave things there. But yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.